Well, hello there, and a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us once again for our Iran war question and answer session. Professor Michael Clarke with us, as always. Michael, afternoon to you, and great to see you again this week. It's been a few days. Feels like quite a lot has happened. My head's kind of spinning still. I'm not quite sure where we are, and hopefully in the next sort of 40 minutes or so, you'll let us all know.
Day 47.
Day 47, right?
Yeah.
Started on the 28th of February.
28th of February, yeah.
So this is our sixth Q&A that we've done. We've been here every single week, apart from the week that both you and I were off as this war has progressed. We're in ceasefire, 8 days into the ceasefire now.
Yeah. It comes to an end next Tuesday, 21st. Yeah.
So another few days of that to go. And I guess we would say, is it holding as far as Iran and the US are concerned?
Yes, as far as a ceasefire of attacks on infrastructure targets or military targets either side, yeah. I think we can say the ceasefire, it's delicate, but so far it's holding. And yeah, we're on President Trump's sixth deadline. So we had a deadline and we're on the sixth version of it.
Yeah.
And that runs out next Tuesday. In theory, apocalypse now starts again on Tuesday, unless he goes for a seventh deadline. And there is some hope because both sides frighten themselves.
Yeah.
On the 7th of April, when we got to this apocalyptic moment, they were both quite scared at where they'd got to. I think
that's interesting.
And there's been peace talks which seem to have failed, but seem to be back on again. They look as if they will take place in the next 48 hours in Pakistan. So I wouldn't be surprised if by next Tuesday, the expiry of the 2-week deadline, there isn't some sort of extension, if there is at least a process of dialogue still ongoing, which I suspect that there will be.
Yeah, it's interesting that those peace talks seem to have come back around. Trump mentioned, I think, just yesterday or maybe today, yesterday, that they were going to get back in the room. Not clear who he'll send, whether he'll send J.D. Vance again.
Not clear, because J.D. Vance obviously had a relatively short temper. He said, they spoke for more than 18 hours. But I mean, the original JCPOA took 18 days in the final analysis.
And the lead up was
Philip Hammond. I mean, he was our foreign secretary, and I remember talking to him about that at a dinner I was at. In the middle of it, he came to a dinner in his constituency, Runnymede,
right?
When we were celebrating Magna Carta, funny enough, and I was just chatting to him about it, and he was saying it's just very hard going. You have to stick with it day after day after day. So going for less than 24 hours and then leaving and saying, well, we can't agree, is not giving it the sort of opportunity that professional diplomats would assume is required.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Well, I wonder if when they go back in the room again, that they'll have all the technical people that they need to make sure that the things can be signed off.
You would hope so. I mean, there was some technical agreement on certain things. I mean, the technicians, the military professionals on either side, they can always agree. They say, if there is a deal, we could do it this way. And if there's a deal, this is what we would propose. And because it's all hypothetical, if there is a deal, then this might happen or that might happen. There's a surprising amount they can often agree on. So it kind of looks as if on the periphery of a negotiation, things are going quite well. But the centre, the core, comes down to the principles. By principles, I mean the political principles, the principal people who are there and their own, mentality. And also, I mean, J.D. Vance, we know, was on the phone repeatedly to President Trump and to Pete Hegseth during the whole process. So he was constantly going back and forth. But a lot of it still comes down to, his relationship with the interlocutors, who in this case was Munir and Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan. He didn't, as far as we know, he didn't face Ghalibaf, who was leading the Iranian delegation face to face. They never came across. No. They sat in one room opposite each other. As far as we know, they never did that. And so they didn't really get to the point where they go into one room and say, do you really want a deal? If you're serious, then let's get on with it.
Significant nonetheless that they're meeting. And it seems from the reporting I'm reading that it's about the length of time they're allowed to, they're not going to be able to enrich uranium. That seems to be the sticking point. 5 years versus sort of 20 years at one end. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, the JCPOA, which is the nuclear deal of 2015, said that the Iranians were allowed to enrich uranium up to 3.67%, which is the level for civilian use, and not beyond that. And that was the idea. And they were being held to that. I mean, the Iranians obviously thought they could wheedle a way out of it, but they hadn't really wheedled a way out of it until the deal was wrecked by President Trump in 2018 when he left the deal. And then they started to enrich quite a lot. But the deal for those 3 years was holding, at least on the nuclear side, better than people had thought and better than the Iranians thought it would hold. They thought they'd be able to get away with a lot more than they couldn't. So that was the deal there. This arrangement would be that you can't enrich any uranium for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, which in one sense would be an advance on the 2015 deal, no enrichment at all,
right.
but
No,
then
for
with a
civilian
time limit.
use. Right.
Now, I don't think the Iranians would agree to no enrichment at all because they regard the ability to enrich uranium as a symbol of their progress as a modern country. In the everybody else can enrich uranium. Even very small countries are allowed to a civilian nuclear program. We live in a world of climate change. We live in a world of transition to non-fossil fuels. Why wouldn't you let us enrich uranium? And so I think that whatever that proposal was, however far it got, I'd be quite surprised if the Iranians would agree to no enrichment. I think we'll end up, if there is a deal, I said this ages ago to Mark Austin, actually, on the 5 o'clock news well over a month ago. I said, if there is a deal, it's going to look pretty much like the 2015 deal.
What a surprise.
Because that was the best deal available at the time.
Well, it took the majors to get to. Remember, it wasn't just the Americans as well. The Europeans were involved, of course, the Brits were involved as well.
That's right, and Russia.
And Russia, right?
Yep.
So it was a whole
Russia
world
was
thing.
quite
like UN
constructive
thing.
at the time. Because the Russians don't care very much whether the Iranians have a nuclear bomb or not. By and large, they think it's better if they don't. But they're not going to worry too much if they do. But it suited the Russians at the time, which was like 2009 up to 2015. Remember, that was a different Russia in a way.
Yep.
It suited them at the time to be cooperative on that issue.
Okay. Well, that was 5 minutes of Michael and I chatting. Let's get to your questions. That is why we are here. Alf, who watches, thanks Alf, has written in to say, Michael, you'll like this. Just want to say how interesting it is to listen to the professor's analysis of the Iran war. Incredible knowledge.
Well, thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
absolutely right, Alf. Well, let's crack on and get some of his incredible knowledge. So, obviously, we're going to talk about the Strait of Hormuz, which wasn't a problem before the war started, is now one of the key problems. Cara G has asked, she said, hello and thank you both, as always, for your wisdom and insightfulness. My question today, how long do you think it will be before the Iranian regime starts firing missiles and drones at blockading US ships? Could that become a new battleground?
It could. I don't think they're likely to do it at the moment because that would immediately throw the United States into a really big offensive. But also, the US blockading ships are not in the Strait of Hormuz. No. They're blockading the Strait of Hormuz, but they're staying quite a long way away in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman, which is quite a long way south. I mean, a good 100 miles, 150 miles to the south. And their chances of hitting any American warships who are on full alert all the time, they've got lots of protection with their Arleigh Burke destroyers. These are the guided missile destroyers, the Arleigh Burke class they're called. And they're very capable. They're really capable. And so the chance of hitting anything useful from the Iranian point of view is quite low. Now, that would change if the Americans decided that they wanted to put a ground force into the Strait of Hormuz or into Karg Island or Kish Island, if they wanted to open up a new front in order to pressurize the Iranians more, then it's possible that they would have to put their vessels in harm's way. But at the moment, they're keeping the vessels out of harm's way. And whereas you think of a blockade as a sort of line of ships on the horizon, just waiting with a sort of a curtain of power waiting for you to go towards it. It isn't like that. The Americans have got very good information about the ships that are coming through. A couple of years ago, they wouldn't have had this sort of information, but the advances in AI means that a maritime intelligence organization of the American sort, and indeed of the International Maritime Organization, the organization that's over the Thames opposite Parliament in London, their information now is very, very good on which ships were something else a while ago, which have changed their registration, where they last were, when they've had the transponders turned off, where they turn them back on again, where they probably were in between. It's very hard now for ships to be evasive on the high seas in the way they used to be, even 5 years ago.
Right.
The merchant marine industry has been, it's governed by maritime law, but regular law breaking from everybody because
Well, it's the shadow fleets and stuff.
not just shadow fleet, but I mean, ships would turn the transponders off because they didn't want the competitors to know where they were.
Wow, okay.
And they were heading for ports where the prices of their goods were higher.
How interesting.
They'd go onto the high seas and they'd wait to be told which port to head for.
Really, to get the best
marginal
price.
gains, yeah.
Brilliant.
And so there's a lot of, as it were, if you like, petty criminality in the maritime domain. That is now much harder. I mean, they still do it, but it's harder not to be seen doing it. Whether it's enforceable or not is a different question. So what the Americans are able to do is track pretty well everything coming, in and out of the Gulf. They'll know what it is. They'll make a decision. And at the moment, their decisions it's on a case-by-case basis. And so the ships, like the Christiana, yesterday, I was tracking this ship for a while myself. It came from Bushehr, which is an Iranian port,
Yep.
and it went to Fujairah, which is a port in the UAE, on the other side of the strait. And so it had come out of an Iranian port, and the Americans let it come through because it didn't bother them. It was a bulk carrier. Whereas another ship, for instance, left. Where did it go now? It came out of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates,
UAE again.
and then was going down the coast to Oman. And again, completely innocent passage, but that ship had been sanctioned in 2023 as Chinese ownership, sanctioned Chinese ownership, and the Americans turned it back.
Right.
So they're having to make decisions on a case-by-case basis at the moment. And it's not clear quite where the consistency of all of this is.
No, and I did hear reporting that lots of ships were going to get sort of Chinese flags and make sure that they were trying just to make it more complicated. I've had a really interesting question actually come in on the live feed from Feathermore. Thank you very much for this. Going to read in your answer to this, Michael. Feathermore asks, could the issues around the Strait affect the American petrodollar hegemony? Could Iran switch to the petro yuan? I remember there were times when there have been wars in the Gulf before where there's talk about switching to the petro euro or another currency, because obviously the dollar is the base currency. Do you think that if this were to go on, there could be a thought or a look at doing that?
I've been reading quite a lot about this recently. That because the dollar is weakening as the reserve currency and the store of value that everybody trusts for all sorts of reasons that we can guess at. However, nobody can show you what an alternative is because the Chinese yuan, the renminbi, as it's properly called, doesn't figure. I mean, Russian currency is neither here nor there. The pound is too dependent on the British economy. The euro, again, is not really universal enough, although that's probably the next contender to the dollar. Yeah. And so when people say the dollar is weakening, it is, but there's no real obvious competitor. Having said that, one of the interesting things is that's emerged in the last week is the Iranians are charging either $1 a barrel for passage through the toll booth through the straits, or on the big tankers it's about $2 million a go to get through the straits, and that's being paid in cryptocurrency. Now, what happens to it then? It's a crypto payment. So what do? They convert that crypto payment into Chinese yuan or renminbi.
Yep.
And that is, although it's not tradable in the world because it's not a convertible currency, they then use that Chinese currency to buy Russian grain, food, or whatever else they need, because the Russians will take it. And they can use it in some Asian countries. And that's how the system is actually working.
Wow,
it's a cryptocurrency payment, which is hard to track and easy to disguise.
Of course.
At some point, you've got to make it into real money. And the real money they make it into is Chinese, and that buys you things in Russia.
That is fascinating. That's the way they get around.
That's the way it's happening. It's been happening like that in the last week, anyway. Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. And they'll be able to continue to do that because there's no way that you could sort of get onto that kind of sanction. Yeah. There's obviously sanctions any transaction.
As long as Russia is prepared to, I mean, as long as China is prepared to redeem cryptocurrencies in favour of its own yuan. And as long as the Russians are prepared to sell stuff to Iran, which of course at the moment they are, and they're selling it at really discounted rates, then they're happy to supply it. And the supply is very easy for them, because if you look at a map, the Caspian Sea unites Russia and Iran. Russia at the northern end of the Caspian Sea, Iran at the southern end, Kazakhstan on the eastern side of the Caspian Sea. So it's really easy if they buy something using Chinese yuan from Russia, the Russians just ship it across the Caspian Sea, and there it is. It's in Iran.
It's incredible, isn't it? 2026, and you're able to step outside sort of fiat currencies and be able to continue to trade. And
in a sophisticated way.
Right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, next question from Poet. Hi, Poet. With the technology available today, is it possible to track Iranian vessels that may be laying mines in the Strait to their loading points and then destroy them?
Yes, vessels that are mine layers. I mean, the Americans claim that they've taken out almost all of the mine layers that
destroyed
the
the Navy.
Iranians had.
Yeah.
But the Iranians, they know that they claim that they've got hundreds of these tiny vessels. I mean, literally sort of fast motorboats, and they've made a big point of showing on the propaganda videos, tunnels literally packed with these fast motorboats. I mean, walking down the tunnels with all these motorboats on the left-hand side, hundreds and hundreds of them is what they want to pretend they've got. And with a fast motorboat, as long as it's concealed, you can zip out and drop half a dozen mines off the back. Now, they're floating mines, so they're very dangerous because you don't know where they're going to float, but they certainly have the effect of closing a waterway, but they close it to your traffic as well. If the Iranians felt that they had no alternative but to mine the whole strait, could the Americans stop them? Probably not. They could certainly mine it with those sort of floating mines. If you want a sophisticated mine, which is tethered to the seabed and is just at the right height and maybe has got a sensor on it so it lets some ships pass and not others, or can be triggered from the shore, that takes a bit more sophistication. You've got to be able to lay it properly. And the Americans would almost certainly see that happening. They could probably stop it happening.
Right.
But the Iranians are believed to have multiple thousands of sea mines of various sorts, and they've already laid some of them with cables to the shore. We can see that, which will allow them literally like a landmine. You can trigger it when something goes past that you want to trigger it under. So they've already got some of those, and nobody's yet swept them away, although they may start at some point. But they could just sow floating mines pretty easily, and the Americans wouldn't be able to stop them.
I mean, the fear of what may happen by attack by missile or drone has stopped much of the traffic going through anyway. Would they need to escalate to the next point and start
Maybe
laying
not.
mines?
No, maybe not. I mean, as long as they can keep the straits dangerous, then they effectively close them. And if it turns out that they can't keep the straits dangerous with drones or aircraft or missiles, if they run out of them, then their last resort is keep it dangerous with mines, if that's what they're determined to do.
John A. asks, is the US using this ceasefire to restock weapons on their ships?
Oh, I'd be very surprised if they weren't.
Yeah, they'd have to. I think Trump gave the game away in the Truth Social after the ceasefire was announced.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
When you were answering, I might ping it up. I think he said something about restocking and getting ready to come back bigger than ever. Yeah.
I mean, everybody does that. I mean, when you look at the way the American battle groups move around, these carrier battle groups, carrier strike groups, I mean, the amount of support ships they have with them. I mean, they always go with a carrier, normally 2 destroyers, a guided missile cruiser, which is what they're called these days, an attack submarine, and then those are the combat ships that normally would go with a carrier. And then you've got all the support ships. So you've got fuel tankers, you've got ammunition, solid support ships, as they're called, ammunition ships. And what they will have been doing anyway, they'll have been going backwards and forwards doing shuttle runs back to probably the Pacific, or wherever is the nearest base where the Americans have got more ammunition, more missiles and all the rest of it that they need, bombs. And they'll have been shuttling backwards and forwards in order to make sure that they're completely bombed up for when they need to be. I mean, given the expenditure of weapons in this campaign, I mean, the number of bombs and missiles they've used up, even on the carrier, with carrier strike forces, is pretty big. And I think they will have needed to replenish, as they were going. And so I'm sure they'll be doing that now. Yeah, I'm sure they will.
They'll be getting themselves.
And so will the Iranians. That's the point. I mean, the Iranians are trying to create more missile fuel. We know that. I mean, they took delivery over a week ago of 3 Chinese shipfuls of precursor chemicals for more solid fuel missile solid fuel for missiles. And they've got decentralized production facilities. So some of them, you would assume, will have survived. So the Iranians, undoubtedly, will be trying to restock themselves,
Yeah, as you would have thought, everyone will prepare themselves should it have to come back again. I can't find the actual Truth Social post, but it's in my head that he definitely said that in one of those posts, because there were quite a few on the day of the ceasefire being announced, that this was a 2-week period, but if they don't make a deal afterwards, the Americans are willing and ready to start the war.
He said something about we're still locked and loaded or something like that. I don't recall that particular one, but that's
his language that's the style. I mean, it might be there in my head anyway, because that's the sort of thing he would say, wouldn't he? All right, next question here. And we're going to ask these two together. This is from Rhythm Sim on X and Kaka Lizlau01, also on X. First question from Rhythm Sim. Everyone is talking about the ceasefire, but what about the long-term day after? Oh my God, that phrase again. If the regime remains intact, but the infrastructure is gone, aren't we just setting the time for a bigger explosion in 5 years? And then the second question, what does a realistic end to this war look like? Ceasefire, regime change, or long-term stalemate?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I think there's a reasonable chance that this war will end quite soon. Ultimately, I mean, the Americans are trying to find a formula that will allow them to declare victory and leave. Right. And then the rest of us are going to have to try and pick up the pieces. And the Strait of Hormuz, which was never a problem before the war, will be a problem that the rest of the world is going to have to live with. And that's a problem, not just a problem in the Gulf of the administration of the Strait of Hormuz, but it's a political and legal problem for all the other straits in the world. I mean, not least, Donald Trump has given yet another free gift, a free strategic gift to Beijing, for which they've done nothing, which is to compromise the principle of the free movement of shipping in straits. And the Chinese, when they make their move in the Strait of Taiwan, and their move may not be an invasion, it may just be a real tightening of their control over the straits. When they do that, which they will do reasonably soon, I suspect, and the world complains, they'll just quote all the things that the United States has said and all the things the United States did as justification for what they're going to do. And so again, he's given them a huge strategic free gift. Having said that, I think that the war, from his point of view, will probably end soon. If it doesn't, then it spins right out of control, and there's no telling what would happen next. We go back to the Armageddon scenario, or the apocalyptic scenario of the 7th of April. But I think the irony of this is that I think ultimately there will be regime change as a result of this war in Iran, because the Iranian government has got, it's got a devastated country to pick up, where the economy will be devastated. And although its own control of the population is brutal and is becoming more brutal, it's got no legitimacy whatsoever with 80% of its population. And so I suspect that what will happen is that there will be another popular uprising. And the difference between what will happen then, as opposed to what might have happened last December and January, is that it will be extremely violent. I think this government is going nowhere in Tehran at the end of this war. And I don't see how it can civilianize itself or liberalize itself or meet any of the aspirations of 80% of the population, who will be, I say 80% because 20%, up to 20% are believed to be supportive, roughly. But that population will be on its knees economically, and you cannot believe that can be tolerated by a country of 90-odd million people, of whom 70 million, say, are so angry and upset and depressed by what is ahead of them. So I think there will be a move to unseat this government, and as a result of this war, I think the move will be extremely violent. I think we'll be looking at real societal fragmentation and breakdown, which will have all sorts of other knock-on effects. And the irony is probably that both Israel and the United States will get their regime change. Ultimately, maybe it won't be in time for them to claim credit for it, but the human cost will be huge.
Absolutely. We're going to come on to Israel in a moment. I realise that we've 20-something minutes in and we haven't actually mentioned Israel and Lebanon, but there is a question coming up and you just mentioned it there. But we'll stick with the US for now. Bob asks, Trump keeps bragging that the US has completely destroyed the Navy, Air Force and Army of Iran. Have they?
In one respect they have, but remember that there's a Navy, an Army and an Air Force of the Iranian state, and then there's an IRGC, Army, Navy and Air Force.
They have their own
systems.
Right, okay.
And although you can say, the Americans give you all the statistics of what they've destroyed, and there's no reason to disbelieve those statistics, and it's pretty dramatic. The Navy, Army and Air Force are on their knees, but it is still the case that the IRGC are able to mount operations on the ground, operations on water, operations underwater, and operations in the air. So whether you call that having a Navy, Army and an Air Force or not, the fact is they have a capability in land, sea, undersea and air, which so far seems fairly robust. That's what I would say. So yeah, you can lose those forces. And in the long term, of course, the Iranians, not the least of the things they're going to have to pick themselves up with after all of this, is to create some sort of armed forces that make sense to whatever the society is going to be. But, they may be broken backed, as they say in military affairs in Iran, maybe a broken backed government, but they're still capable of operations in all the domains of warfare.
Yeah, I suppose the proof of this is the fact that shipping is still too scared to pass through because of the potential of whatever's along the coasts being able to hit them. So there is some capability there.
My own private estimate is that the Iranians have probably got at least 1,000 to 1,500 ballistic missiles left. I suspect that they've got several hundred, maybe not many hundreds, but let's say 300, 400, something like that, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles. I don't think they're down to a last dozen or so. And they've still got multiple tens of thousands of drones, and they're producing them all the time, just like the Ukrainians. They can produce drones in a week.
That was going to be my question. Were they the manufacturing bases, were they targeted as part of the US?
They were.
Campaign in the
but a lot of the support we now know. The Financial Times has been doing some good stuff on this. The Iranians have been using Chinese satellite information, right? Now, the Americans have been targeting their ground stations, but the satellite information that the Chinese have been giving the Iranians is from private companies. They're not really private at all. They're from, Beijing runs these private companies. But the download, the ground station isn't in Iran, it's in Shanghai. So the Americans aren't going to target that. So the fact is that the Iranians are getting information downloaded to Shanghai from a satellite that the Iranians operate. So, the satellite was given to them. It was put into orbit. It was given to them in 2023. They maneuver it. They've maneuvered it over all the targets, the American targets they wanted. The download information doesn't go down to their ground links. It goes to Shanghai.
So it's
Shanghai
safe,
gives
and
it
then
to
sent
them.
across.
That's there's a lot of proof about that. So the fact is that it's very hard for the Americans to actually wipe out the infrastructure of Iran's military response, because the Iranians are sophisticated people. They've thought about this. They've had a long time to prepare it, and they are technologically pretty advanced. So that's what you're up against, yeah.
Really interesting stuff. And we mentioned China a few times now, and I noticed in the rest of our questions, China doesn't come up again. But I just want to get your thoughts on reporting of Trump's visit to China and potentially Putin's visit to China. Is it reported? Is it right that Putin may well be going?
Yes, yeah, I think
before Trump, because Trump's visit was meant to be this
April.
Month,
yeah, it was
right?
This month. It's gone back to next month. Cancelled, it may go back again.
It may go back again, but in that time, Putin's going to get there first. Now, Putin and Xi meet all the time. This endless partnership, whatever they call it. But the choreography of this is going to be fascinating. The war is still ongoing.
It is, and Trump really needs this China visit for other reasons, for economic reasons. He still hasn't got anywhere close to his grand deal with China. And in the first round, when he, on Liberation Day, when he announced these massive tariffs against China, and China responded. And then they literally pulled a lever called rare earths, which was no surprise to those of us who have been paying attention for 10 years, but seemed to have taken the White House by surprise. The Americans immediately backed off, immediately. And so, if this is a boxing match, then President Trump, came out swinging in round one and lost the first round pretty decisively. So this summit is, let's say, it's the beginning of round two, but he's already in quite a poor position. He wants to go to China, and the Chinese keep putting the meeting back. And I think Putin...
Oh, is it the Chinese that are putting it back?
Chinese are putting it back, yeah. I think both sides agree this probably wouldn't be the right moment. But he wants the meeting more than they do, for sure.
I thought it was Trump that postponed it.
Believe me, no, he wants it more than they do.
Yeah,
he won't admit that, but he does. And the White House does.
Yeah.
And I think Putin probably seen an opportunity to create a more united front before Trump gets there. And this summit may not take place. It may be put back to some indefinite date and is much later in the year or even not at all. It depends on where the war goes. The Chinese, A, they're aiding Iran, B, they're getting some benefit from this, but C, the Chinese don't want this war to go on. They see the long-term damage this is doing is worse for them than the short-term benefits they're getting in oil prices, but availability of oil and some of the other geostrategic advantages they're getting in the Middle East. So on the whole, the Chinese want this thing to come to an end, but they don't want to be made responsible for bringing it to an end.
Very difficult Chinese position. All right, question now on the situation in Lebanon. At Mario O'Connell on X asks, are Israel's continued attacks on Lebanon a reason for the talks failing?
Do you mean the talks between Iran and the United States?
I can't be sure what Mario meant. What Mario thinks, but I would suspect that Mario is thinking because they're still attacking.
If that's the thought behind it, you can't be sure, but it's probably true. It certainly didn't help.
It didn't help.
And again, the fact that there was a ceasefire declared and then nobody knew whether it applied to Lebanon or not.
Has that been cleared up? Because at the time, the Pakistanis said it did apply to Lebanon and Hezbollah. Israel, the US.
Iran said it applied to Lebanon. Pakistan said it applied to Lebanon. The United States and Israel said it didn't.
No.
And the problem was, it was never, as we've said before, it was never written down.
No.
I mean, it was just declared on social media, and it's in the nature of this amateur hour diplomacy that things were agreed on the telephone or by Twitter or something or by email, but nothing was written down. There was no document. Normally, if you have an agreement like this, a really important agreement, people's lives can depend on this. It's written in whatever language. It's then translated into all the important languages that cover everybody in the negotiations. Translators pore over it to make sure that the words mean exactly the same in the different languages involved. So it might be translated into 5 or 6 different languages. And it takes time, and that is the document. That is the thing you're going to stick to. Nothing like that in this case. And so the fighting in Lebanon certainly contributes to the general instability of the whole thing, the general delicacy of the whole thing. And the Israelis are now, they're doing 2 things. One is that, interestingly, they're attacking Bin Jubail. And Bin Jubail, right on the coast, they've never taken before. It's a Hezbollah stronghold. In 2006, they attacked it and lost.
They were pushed
the
out.
Battle of Bin Jubail was a loss for them. They had to withdraw. They're attacking it again because, again, in one sense, they've gone into conventional war. They're now fighting Hezbollah on the ground, and Hezbollah are trying to hold their ground from this particular town, which has always been their command center in a conventional military sense. So Bin Jubail, the battle has been resumed there. Meanwhile, the Israelis are now, because the Americans have pushed them, are having talks with the Lebanese government.
Yep, that happened.
Which
in the US.
they could have had decades ago, and they should have had a year ago, because when the peace deal was agreed last autumn over Hezbollah, it was agreed, it was set into the agreement then, that the United States would facilitate IDF or Israeli Lebanese talks, and nothing happened because it was written down and then people just moved on and ignored it. So they should have been having these discussions at least a year ago, and they could have been having them decades ago, because the Lebanese government doesn't want Hezbollah. And the fact is, Hezbollah are stronger than the Lebanese army, much stronger. And the Hezbollah will only be defeated, if it can be defeated in Lebanon, with the help of the Lebanese themselves, the Lebanese government, and maybe the Israelis. And so that discussion, which is a very sensitive discussion anyway, has been waiting decades to happen, and should have happened these past 12 months, is beginning to happen now. And Hezbollah have said, we don't care. If we will destroy the Lebanese army if we have to.
Well, the great fear for the Lebanese army, I guess, is that their country descends into civil war as it did in the 80s.
Again,
and they start fighting one another along, religious and
sectarian lines. Absolutely.
It just tears itself
so
apart.
again, the prospects for Lebanon are absolutely dire because Israel is absolutely determined to have a security zone. And again, you know why they think that.
Yep.
But they've only got one-dimensional way of thinking about it, which is that they've got to physically, kill as many Hezbollah people as possible and push them far enough north.
Destroy all the villages up to
exactly.
the
Just wreck the place in the way that they've done with Gaza. Simply create a wasteland and call it peace, as Tacitus is said to have said, and therefore create a buffer zone. Which they can, where they feel secure on the Israeli side of the buffer zone. But it commits them to, unless they can defeat Hezbollah decisively, it commits them to endless open-ended war again, which is what they had between 1982 and the year 2000, 18 years of it.
Which they didn't win.
No,
they
withdrew in 2000.
They had to withdraw.
No better. They intervened again in 2006 and made a mess of it and withdrew. And here we are again.
And there are 1 million Lebanese displaced to who knows where. It's a country of 7 million people.
That's right,
so it's a sizable proportion of the country that are now displaced. There are evacuation orders in place for parts of Beirut as well, but to where they're meant to go. And I think the plan was, you can correct me on this, Michael, from Israel Katz, is that they were going to use Khan Yunis as the model, that you would just do that, but in Beirut and in Lebanon.
Exactly. No, that's what they've said. Khan Yunis is the model for what we can do in Lebanon. And meanwhile, the Zionist nationalists, who are not without any support in Israel, in fact, 2 members of the government are Zionist nationalists.
Ben-Gvir.
Yeah, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are talking openly about, well, we'll occupy the half of Gaza that the IDF is now sitting on. We'll occupy Lebanon up to the south of the Litani River. We'll consolidate the bit of Syria we occupy, Mount Hermon. The Golan Heights we already control, though illegally. And we'll take the West Bank. So this is the greater Israel that they've always had in mind. and they see that if Israel is going to fight on all of these fronts at once, then the only thing we can do is occupy them physically,
Push out,
make
expand,
Israel
hold
better.
it.
Yeah, it's called imperialism.
Extraordinary time. And it's all...
Now, these people have not. They're not making policy, but these people are not fringe elements in the Israeli
Not anymore.
establishment.
They're
now
were,
mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. They're in the government. They're making the decisions. We could do a whole discussion on that, I think, and perhaps we probably should. Because I think
Sadly, yes.
it feels like it, with Trump's constant posting and all that's going on there, that can be the distraction. But I think for many people, what's really happening is Israel expanding out across the region.
Because I mean, for the way Xi Jinping thinks of it, the way Putin thinks of it. I mean, President Trump's presidency offers great opportunities for certain countries to achieve objectives that the previous American president would not have gone along with.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
All right. Question here from Morgan, who starts very nicely. Hi, Michael. Love your insight and knowledge. Can listen to you all day. So good, Morgan.
Please don't.
And the question, though, I love this. Without being conspiratorial, ... there has been suggestion that the rescue mission of the F-15 pilots was some sort of cover for a botched mission to steal the uranium. What's the likelihood of that? Go on.
It's not a stupid question. There have been a couple of articles recently saying that there was something odd about this rescue mission. That the two pilots of the F-15 went down. The first one, the pilot was recovered.
Yep.
Normally, the weapons support officer or weapons systems officer, colonel, was holed up in the mountains, and it looked like a real heroic Hollywood-esque thing, and it seems to be. Unless I've missed it, we still don't know the identity of this officer, the colonel.
Name hasn't been announced as far as I can see.
And the conspiratorial story, it is all circumstantial, but it does raise some interesting questions. So why would they send two Hercules C-130s to this recovery when you'd normally do it by helicopter?
Yep.
Now, one of the C-130s was carrying mini helicopters. All right, that's one thing. Second thing, isn't it convenient that there was a disused agricultural airstrip?
Perfect.
25 miles south of Isfahan. And why?
And Isfahan, the significance of that, just for everyone who...
Exactly, because the possibility that Isfahan was the site of this uranium, the enriched uranium, is buried under the rubble somewhere. Now, that may or may not be true. It might also be at Fordo, and it might be in Pickaxe Mountain, which was built not so long ago. I mean, nobody's entirely certain, but American intelligence may say, we know it's under the rubble at Isfahan. That's possible. And so there's a question of, wasn't it convenient? Why 100, men and women on the ground?
It's a hell of a
one
mission,
person?
yeah. It's a hell of a mission.
Why such a big force?
Well, no person left behind, remember?
Yeah, that's right. Now, I'm satisfied with what they did on those scores. But I acknowledge it was a slightly curious operation. It didn't look like other operations. But against that, I mean, that's all circumstantially plausible, just about. But against that, supposing they were using this operation to actually get to Isfahan and try and get this uranium out, if it's under the rubble, it's going to take them a very long time.
Oh, they're going to need equipment, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Heavy equipment. It's taking days, and certainly many, many hours at the very least, to drill through and find whatever it is they're looking for. And remember that there were Iranians closing in on the site all the time, closing in on the colonel, assuming he existed, all the time. So the idea of an operation, using the cover of this to grab the stuff at Isfahan just isn't credible to me. What I think might be the case is that the colonel does exist, that he was genuinely lost, he was genuinely recovered, but that somebody also had the bright idea.
Hey, we can use this.
Let's get some other people in there and do a record.
Around, and have
let's
a
find
look.
out. And maybe that was it.
Appreciate that question, Morgan.
Yeah, it's not a stupid question at all. Not
really
at all.
good. All right, coming to the end now, Michael. Final question, and many people, I see this all the time actually in the comments on the social. While we're talking about Iran and the situation in the Middle East, people are forgetting about Ukraine, and they're wondering what is happening there. So Flint has asked what is happening in Ukraine. Seems forgotten, even though the Iran conflict now, at least, Flint is in ceasefire and is largely stalled. So what is happening in Ukraine now? The Russians launched a spring offensive, which don't seem to have gone anywhere.
They have, and it's got nowhere.
Right.
The Ukrainians have done really well, actually, somewhat against expectations. As things have loosened up, as the weather has changed, the Ukrainians have brought in some of their elite forces at the right moments, and they've really mobilized their drone advantage. And Zelensky said, I think it was yesterday, that they have actually forced a whole Russian unit to surrender to robots.
I love it. A ground
I think
drone.
that might, Now, I think that might actually be an exaggeration, but certainly they've been using many more robotics. And he quoted lots of figures yesterday, which was no way verifying. But he said, the 22,000 robotic devices in use, and we're producing 1 million of them this year. 90% of all the robots are home produced. I think that's probably true. So he might have been exaggerating a bit, but undoubtedly, the Ukrainians are innovating faster than the Russians, and they have had some real success. Not strategic breakthroughs, but they've consolidated their lines in all the places the Russians were trying to break through. And so the Russians are now burning the early part of the summer in relatively fruitless attacks. They're still losing a lot of people. And only last week, at something I was involved in, a specialist was saying from Ukraine, he said the product cycle time now is about 6 weeks.
For
6 weeks
to get from the factory out to
well, something goes on the front line. It works. The Russians work out how it's working and counter it.
Wow.
And then we go back and we send it back
Tinker
to
it again.
and the manufacturers come back 6 weeks later with the next version.
It's incredible.
It's a 6 week, and it goes straight to the front line. It doesn't go through a procurement system. They've got this new system. They give points for the hits that they get on the front line.
Yep.
Units get points, like currency, and they can use their points to go to the manufacturers and say, send it straight to us.
kit. Wow.
Never mind the Ministry of Defence, send it straight to us.
No test, just it's tested in battle.
Exactly, yeah. And they're not doing all their procurement that way, because that would be chaotic. But it gives the units a real incentive to success, to innovate, and to have a direct contact with the manufacturers.
Yeah.
And so that was the last I heard a week ago. They said that the product cycle time has come down in some parts of the Ukrainian line to 6 weeks, which is astonishing.
Yeah, they're really turning it around, and obviously, as we all
But they're doing all right. I mean, militarily, the Ukrainians are holding on. They're holding on. I mean, we still have got big strategic issues. They're running out of the ammunition they really need. Patriot air defense systems. They need much more from Europe that they're not getting. They need more of everything.
Yeah.
But from a frontline perspective, they're holding on.
And I think as well, it's worth dwelling on the fact that this winter, the coldest winter they've had, they bombarded nearly daily with huge numbers of drones and missiles from the air, civilian targets, trying to completely sap the morale of the population, and it didn't sap the morale of the population.
No, it didn't do it. And that's the point. They got through the worst winter so far, and they're determined to get through the summer. But they still need some sort of big strategic change in the way the war is being handled by the rest of the world to give them a chance of pushing the Russians back.
Yeah.
So the Russians get keen on a ceasefire. That's what they want. They want to do something to make the Russians want a ceasefire. The Russians don't want a ceasefire.
No.
Whatever they say to Trump, they absolutely don't. But if they started to lose territory, and they're beginning to lose some, but if they began to lose significant bits of territory they fought over for the last 4 years, they'd want a ceasefire.
And Michael,
the Ukrainians would take it.
It just feels so long ago that we were sitting here talking about Alaska and talks and Witkoff going over there all the time. That's just...
We've been around the same circle 3 times now. The first circle was April last year. The second circle was August. That was Alaska. The third circle was the longest, began in October and didn't come to an end really until the end of January. That's all gone now. So we've been around the same circle 3 times. And it's generally assumed in Kiev that as and when the Iran war winds up, as and when, then the United States will formally walk away from Ukraine.
Interesting.
That's what they're preparing for. Yeah. And they're ready for it. They're ready for it.
Well, at least they are. And we will have more analysis, of course, from Michael on the war in Ukraine. You can find that on our Sky News app and our live blog. And Michael, you're busy. You're going to be on telly pretty soon. I'm sure you've got loads more to do. Thank you very much for being with us this week. I think schedules will align, so we will do another one of these same time next week. Thanks.